Jasper Whittaker, a successful lawyer in New York, led a busy and cold life. One morning, on his way to the office, he accidentally bumped into a young candy seller on the street. Aiden, a skinny boy with hopeful green eyes, offered to sell Jasper some candy to help raise funds for his school. However, in his rush and impatience, Jasper shoved Aiden aside, causing the box of candy to spill across the ground. Without a second thought, he walked away, not even looking back. Little did he know, just minutes later, a phone call would change everything, a call that would shake his entire world. The boy he had just pushed wasn't an ordinary child. So who is Aiden really? And what will happen when Jasper uncovers the shocking truth? Hit subscribe now so you don't miss this emotional and surprising story. Don't go anywhere. The twist will leave you speechless. New York was as it always was, hustling, never stopping. The blaring horns of the cars, the crowded sidewalks full of rushing people, each with a destination and no one wanting to slow down. The busy cafes, the ringing work calls cutting through the noise, all the familiar sounds of a city that never sleeps. Jasper Whittaker stepped out of his luxury apartment, his cold gaze sweeping over the street below, uninterested in anything around him. The Rolex on his wrist read 7:45 a.m., giving him exactly 15 minutes to reach the office. He didn't need to look back. He was always on time, always following the plan he had set. Everything in his life was calculated, leaving no room for surprises or interruptions. His Armani suit was perfectly pressed, his Italian leather briefcase held firmly in hand. Everything about him reflected who Jasper was. He was precise, neat, and unwilling to let anything slip from his control. He descended the steps of his building and merged into the flow of people heading toward downtown. But unlike them, he wasn't swept up in the chaotic rhythm of the city around him. Unfamiliar faces passed by, none of them important enough to make him pause. An elderly woman struggling with a heavy cart, a street musician playing an old tune on a worn guitar, a homeless man curled up in a corner. To Jasper, they were just background figures in his world. He didn't have time to care about people like them. He had bigger things to focus on. The sky was gray. The towering buildings blocked out the sun, creating a cold, indifferent portrait of the city. The morning air still held a hint of chill, but Jasper didn't even notice. Every step he took had a purpose, and every second had to be maximized. Another day began just like every other, with nothing different, nothing worth stopping for. But Jasper had no idea that just a few meters away, something completely unplanned was waiting, a moment that seemed insignificant at the time, but would soon become the turning point that would change everything. Jasper walked briskly along the sidewalk, his footsteps echoing steadily amid the bustling crowd. The city was as noisy as ever. Yellow taxis speeding down the streets, car horns blaring in intervals, and the hurried conversations of passers-by blending into the chaotic symphony that was New York. He paid no attention to those sounds, nor to anyone around him. To him, everything was just a blurry backdrop to a world that he controlled, a world of numbers, power, and lawsuits where even the smallest mistake could determine the fate of a corporation. Every second mattered, and this morning was no different. As he turned the corner, a voice from below his line of sight made him hesitate for a brief moment. "Sir, would you like to buy some candy?" Jasper glanced down. Standing before him was a boy, thin and smaller than most kids his age. He wore a worn-out coat with sleeves too long for his small frame and tattered shoes with soles nearly worn through. But what caught Jasper's attention most were the boy's eyes, green, clear, and bright with hope. In his hands, the boy held a small box full of brightly colored candies, clutched tightly, as if it were the only thing he had left in the world. Jasper had no time for this. He furrowed his brow, irritation showing clearly on his face. This wasn't the first time he'd been stopped by street vendors or beggars, and he never found any reason to stop. "Move aside." His voice was cold, lacking any trace of patience. The boy stepped back, but still held the box firmly. He swallowed nervously, then spoke in a soft but sincere voice. "Just one box, sir, to help my school." Jasper didn't let him finish. With a quick motion, he shoved the boy aside without a second thought. The box of candy fell to the ground, brightly colored candies scattered across the sidewalk. Some rolled into the drain and disappeared instantly. Others were crushed under the feet of passing pedestrians, breaking into tiny fragments. The boy stood frozen, not immediately reaching down to pick them up. His eyes were vacant, not from anger, not from fear, but from a haunting acceptance, as if he had grown all too familiar with this kind of treatment. Jasper didn't look back. He continued walking, his mind fixed on the upcoming meeting, the numbers, the contracts that needed signing. A poor boy on the street meant nothing in his world. He was just one of the countless faces Jasper passed by every day, unimportant people whose fates had no bearing on him. But little did Jasper know, just a few minutes later, a phone call would make him turn around, a phone call that would shake his entire world. The boy he had just pushed wasn't an ordinary child, and this wasn't just another morning. This was the beginning of a story that Jasper could never have imagined. Jasper stepped through the glass doors of the skyscraper, the biting cold wind from the street abruptly blocked behind him. The lobby of the building was brightly lit, with office workers hurriedly passing one another, all absorbed in their tasks. He strode quickly toward the elevator, his mind already preoccupied with the upcoming meeting. The candy-selling boy from earlier had completely slipped from his thoughts. To Jasper, it had been nothing more than a fleeting, insignificant moment. He glanced at his wristwatch, 7:52 a.m., just 3 more minutes to reach the meeting room as planned. Another morning passing by just like any other, nothing worth dwelling on. But at that very moment, his phone vibrated in his pocket, shattering his thoughts. Jasper frowned, pulling the phone out. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number, not saved in his contacts. A brief moment of hesitation passed through his mind. Over the years, he had gotten used to only answering calls related to work, numbers, lawsuits, business matters. But something felt off. He pressed the answer button. Jasper. The voice on the other end of the line was breathless, urgent. You have to help me. My son is missing. Jasper froze instantly, his whole body tensed as if a cold gust of wind had swept through the space. He recognized that voice immediately, a name he thought had been buried deep in his memory, Dominic Reeves. His best friend from the past. Old images flashed through his mind. Days spent together at law school, big career dreams, endless debates late into the night. Dominic had once been the closest person to him, until life had pulled them in different directions. How long had it been since he last heard that voice? But Jasper had no time to think too much, because Dominic's next words made his entire world come to a sudden halt. My son is missing. Jasper gripped the phone tighter, his palms suddenly slick with sweat. An odd sensation surged in his chest, a vague unease, but it was too sharp to ignore. He took a deep breath, forcing his voice to stay calm. Dominic, what's going on? A deep sigh echoed from the other end. Dominic was clearly exhausted, his voice carrying a terrifying sense of desperation. Do you remember Aiden? He paused for a moment, then continued, his voice trembling. He went missing 3 years ago. I've searched everywhere, but there's been no trace. But this morning, someone reported seeing a boy who looks just like him in the downtown area. I need your help, Jasper. You're the only one I can trust. Jasper's heart raced in his chest. Aiden. The name hit him like a sharp knife to the mind. A sudden thought flashed in his head, so quickly it nearly took his breath away. The boy from earlier, those bright green eyes, the thin frame, the resigned expression as he picked up the spilled candy from the sidewalk. It couldn't be an absurd coincidence. But why did the thought cling to him so tightly? Jasper suddenly felt a chill sweep over his body. He looked down at his palm, realizing he had been gripping the phone so tightly that his knuckles were white. Something wasn't right, something he couldn't explain. And in that moment, he knew this was no longer just another ordinary morning. Jasper could no longer make out the words Dominic was saying. The sounds on the other end of the line became distorted, distant, as though a fog had settled over the conversation, making everything feel blurred. In his mind, only one image remained, the boy from this morning. Those piercing green eyes haunted him like a ghost. He saw the moment the candy box fell to the ground, the brightly colored candies scattering across the sidewalk, rolling into the drain. The boy bent down to pick them up, slowly and silently. But what suffocated Jasper was the look in his eyes, a look devoid of hope, the way the boy stood still for a moment, as if he had grown so accustomed to being shoved aside, to the indifference of adults, to being invisible. A sudden wave of regret surged in Jasper's chest, but he quickly pushed it aside. He wasn't the type to let emotions control him, and this could very well be a mere coincidence. But what if it wasn't? A vague unease began to creep into his thoughts. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice calm, but the tension rising within him was palpable. Dominic. He paused for a moment, feeling the dryness in his throat before speaking again. Aiden has green eyes, brown hair, right? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then suddenly, Dominic's voice cut through, frantic and almost choked. Yes. Have you seen him, Jasper? I've been searching for my son for 3 years. 3 years. That span of time echoed in Jasper's mind like a deafening bell. He gripped the phone tighter, the cold sensation running down his spine. Fragmented memories began to piece together in a terrifying way. Aiden, the child Dominic had mentioned countless times in the first months after the boy disappeared. Dominic had searched frantically, the calls, the photos sent everywhere, the messages pleading for help. But gradually, with no clues to follow, people began to believe that the boy was lost forever. And Jasper, like everyone else, had believed that too. But now, there was a possibility that made his body freeze. Had he actually encountered the boy this morning? Was the boy with the candy box on the street really Aiden, the child Dominic had been searching for all these years? Jasper tried to reason it out in a more logical way. This city had millions of people, thousands of homeless children on the streets. Was it possible that he had accidentally met Aiden? But then the details kept pulling him back to that thought. Those bright green eyes, just like what Dominic had described. The small, thin frame, as if he had endured far too many days of hardship. And the final thing, the way the boy bit his lip when he was nervous. He clearly remembered that moment right after Jasper had shoved him aside. The boy had bitten his lip, an unconscious habit. Jasper felt the air around him press down on his chest. His heart pounded heavily, its rhythm quickening unnaturally. If it really was Aiden, if he had pushed the boy away without realizing it, then this was worse than any mistake he had ever made. A gnawing feeling rose within him, urging him to do something, to act immediately. He clenched the phone tighter, took a deep breath, and steadied his voice as best as he could. Dominic, could Aiden still be in the downtown area? He tried to stay calm, but the urgency in his tone betrayed him. On the other end of the line, Dominic nearly screamed, I don't know. I just got the tip this morning. Jasper, if you've seen him, I need you to help me find him. You're my only hope. Jasper clenched his fist, looking out through the thick glass of the skyscraper window. The crowd of people continued to bustle on the street below, cars speeding by without pause. The city continued its busy rhythm as if nothing had changed. But for Jasper, everything felt completely different now. If Aiden really was out there, if the boy had been living on the streets for the past 3 years, he couldn't just stand still anymore. He had to find that boy. But the question was, where had he gone? Jasper rushed out of the building without a second thought. He didn't care about the curious glances from the receptionist or the calls of his assistant behind him. All he could think about now was the boy. The image of those green eyes, empty and hollow, kept replaying in his mind like a slow-motion film. He had shoved the boy aside. He hadn't looked back. And now, realizing the horrifying truth, he couldn't let it end like this. His footsteps echoed on the sidewalk, blending into the cacophony of the city. Cars sped by. People hurriedly brushed past each other. But Jasper felt like everything around him was spinning in his head. Where could the boy have gone? Where had he vanished in this sea of people? He scanned every face on the street, his eyes darting quickly from every corner, every alley, but there was no sign of Aiden. His breathing grew more labored, his heart pounding unnaturally fast. A deep sense of fear surged within him. This wasn't the first time Aiden had disappeared. The boy had been missing for 3 years. Jasper couldn't let it happen again. He ran past old stairways, weaving through the crowd, his eyes scanning everywhere. But the city was too vast, and a small child like Aiden could disappear in the blink of an eye. He glanced at an old bus stop where a few homeless children huddled together, but none of them were the boy he was looking for. He turned back to the corner where he had met Aiden this morning. No one was there. No candy box, no trace of the boy. Only the broken pieces of candy scattered across the street, crushed by passing cars, as if the boy had never existed. A deep, visceral fear rose in Jasper's chest, a feeling he had never experienced before. He had faced the toughest lawsuits, won the most brutal legal battles, but he had never felt such overwhelming helplessness. If that boy really was Aiden, and if he disappeared again, Jasper would never forgive himself. Then, off in the distance, in the shadow of a narrow alley, he spotted a small figure huddled on the steps of a closed store. Jasper's heart skipped a beat. The boy was sitting hunched over, clutching an empty candy box to his chest. His head rested on his knees, his small form so fragile it made Jasper's chest ache. The boy sat there silent, as if the entire world had forgotten him. No one noticed him, no one stopped to ask if he was okay. He was just sitting there, like an invisible shadow amidst the bustling world. Jasper took a deep breath, feeling the weight on his chest. He approached cautiously, step by step, as if afraid that with one too quick movement, the boy would vanish again. When he was just a few steps away, he called out, his voice hoarse from the overwhelming emotions rising in his chest. Aiden. The boy immediately flinched. His small shoulders trembled, and when he looked up, his green eyes locked onto Jasper's. But this time, Jasper didn't see hope in them anymore, only fear. Who are you? The boy's voice was small, raspy, as if it had been far too long since he had spoken to anyone. Jasper's chest tightened. Looking at the boy sitting there, alone, lost, and wary, he realized a painful truth. Aiden didn't trust him. How long had the boy lived in fear? How long had it been since anyone had called his name? The way Aiden looked at Jasper, as if he were just another stranger on the street, another person who had walked past him without stopping, another person who had pushed him aside without a second thought. Jasper felt an indescribable pain, a feeling he had never experienced before. He had been wrong, deeply wrong. This boy wasn't just a homeless child selling candy on the street. He was Aiden, Dominic's son. And for 3 years, he had lived in a world where no one had found him, no one had protected him, no one had cared. And this morning, Jasper had shoved that boy away without a second thought. Jasper's throat closed, but this time he knew he couldn't let the boy slip away again. No matter what it took, he would bring him home. Aiden looked at Jasper with a mixture of weariness and something fragile, as if he was trying to decide whether or not to trust the stranger standing before him. His green eyes sparkled under the street lights, but instead of reflecting joy or the innocence of a child, they held only caution and the pain that no child should ever have to endure. Jasper felt a tightening in his chest. He knelt down, maintaining enough distance so that the boy wouldn't feel threatened. His voice was low but softer than ever before. Aiden, how have you been surviving all this time? The boy blinked for a moment, as if the question had left him unsure of how to respond. A cold gust of wind tousled the brown strands of hair falling over his forehead. Aiden clenched his bony hands together, his fingers instinctively gripping the edge of his torn, oversized jacket. A long pause followed, as if the boy was searching his mind for the right words. I don't really remember, his voice trailed off, as if he wasn't even sure about his own answer. I just know I've been wandering the streets for a long time. Jasper felt a lump rise in his throat. For a long time, those words rang in his mind, heavier than anything else he had heard. This boy had been missing for 3 years. 3 years of a child's life, a long stretch of time, a period that should have been filled with happiness, safety, love. But instead, he had been roaming the streets with no place to call home, no one searching for him. Jasper looked at the boy before him, each detail of his face etching itself into his mind. The hollow cheeks from malnutrition, the dirt on his small hands, the frayed edges of his ill-fitting jacket. But what struck him the most was the resignation in his eyes. A child who should never have looked at the world this way. A child who should never have considered wandering aimlessly as something normal. He took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. Aiden, do you remember how you ended up here? Do you remember anything from before? The boy bit his lip, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He glanced down at the empty candy box in his hands, as though searching for an answer among the scattered fragments of his memories. I just remember that at first I wasn't here. His voice was so quiet that Jasper had to strain to hear. I remember someone took me, but I don't remember who they were. I just remember that after I had to survive on my own. Jasper felt a shiver run down his spine. Someone took him. That meant Aiden hadn't just disappeared on his own. He had been taken by someone. But somehow, he had ended up on the streets, completely alone. The questions kept swirling in Jasper's mind, but he knew that now was not the time to interrogate him. Aiden was scared, The boy could run away at any moment if he felt pressured too much. He softened his tone, trying to bring a sense of safety. Do you remember anyone who took care of you? Was there anyone who helped you? Aiden shrugged but didn't say a word. Another gust of wind blew past, and the boy instinctively pulled his shoulders in, as though he had grown used to the cold. Jasper realized this boy had long since stopped feeling the sting of loneliness. No one had sheltered him, no one had protected him. A surge of anger welled up inside Jasper, but he fought it down. Not now. He couldn't let his anger scare the boy. Instead, he gently removed his coat and carefully draped it over Aiden. The boy flinched slightly, and his eyes flickered with a moment of surprise. You don't need to. The boy shook his head, but Jasper only smiled softly. You need it more than I do. He didn't force it. He simply spoke the truth. And for the first time since they had reunited, Aiden didn't resist. Jasper looked at the small boy before him, feeling something shift inside him. He hadn't recognized this boy this morning. He had shoved him aside without thinking. But now, standing in front of him, seeing the invisible scars that life had left on him, Jasper knew that he would never let that happen again. He lowered his voice, speaking slowly and surely. Aiden, I know someone who's been searching for you for the past 3 years. Would you like to meet that person? Aiden shuddered, his green eyes blinking rapidly. Then he whispered, his voice laced with a fear mixed with fragile hope. Who? Jasper looked at him, his gaze deep but without hesitation. Your father. Jasper kept his voice as warm as possible. Aiden, your father has never stopped searching for you. He spoke slowly, trying to convey sincerity in each word. But as soon as those words left his mouth, Aiden immediately shook his head, his eyes darkening, his lips pressed tight. Tears shimmered at the corners of his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. I don't believe you. His voice was small but resolute, carrying the pain that had built up over years. If he really wanted to find me, why didn't he show up? Why didn't he come to where I was? Aiden's question rang out in the stillness of the quiet street, cutting through Jasper like a knife. He looked at the boy in front of him, a child who had lost faith in the person who should have protected him the most. Jasper clenched his fists, trying to control the anger rising in his chest. It wasn't anger at Aiden, but anger at the truth that had made this boy suffer for so long. 3 years. 3 years of a child's life, a span that should have been filled with happiness, security, love. But instead, he had lived on the streets, alone, hungry, cold. Who had taken him? Who had stolen his right to have a family? He took a deep breath, then crouched down to meet Aiden's eyes. Your father has done everything to find you, Jasper said softly. He called the police, hired detectives, searched everywhere. He never gave up. Aiden shook his head more vehemently, biting his lip. If he really wanted to find me, I wouldn't have had to sleep on the streets. I wouldn't have had to live like this. His voice cracked, his green eyes reddening. Jasper could feel the resentment, but beneath it, there was the deep pain of a child abandoned. He had endured too much, had grown too accustomed to surviving on his own. And now, no words could erase the 3 years of suffering. Jasper knew what he had to do. He couldn't force Aiden to believe right away, nor could he change what had already happened. But he could show the boy that he wasn't alone anymore. He sat down beside him, keeping enough distance to make sure Aiden didn't feel pressured. Aiden, I know you don't trust easily, Jasper said slowly, looking into the boy's green eyes, now filled with emotion. I know you've been alone for so long. You've learned to protect yourself, learned not to depend on anyone. But there's one thing you need to know. You don't have to do it alone anymore. Aiden shivered slightly. He didn't answer, but his small hands clenched tighter, as if battling with himself. Jasper didn't rush him. He gave the boy the time he needed. A cold gust of wind blew through, and Aiden instinctively huddled in on himself. The coat Jasper had draped over him earlier was probably the warmest thing Aiden had had in months. Jasper realized that, and it made his heart ache. He spoke again, softly, without pressure. You don't have to believe right away, he met Aiden's gaze, unwavering. But let me take you to meet your father. You can decide for yourself. If after meeting him, you still don't want to believe, I won't force you. But at least give him a chance. Aiden bit his lip, his eyes wavering. Perhaps for the first time in 3 years, he was being given the power to decide for himself. And perhaps that was the only thing that could make him take the next step. After a long pause, Aiden finally nodded. Jasper let out a relieved breath, But he knew this was only the first step in a long, difficult journey to win back this boy's trust. Jasper pulled out his phone, his finger hesitating for a moment before dialing the number. He knew this call would change everything. The truth Dominic had been waiting for over the past 3 years was just a few seconds away. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, then pressed the call button. The ringing seemed endless, each tone echoing in his ears as it stretched on. Jasper could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had made hundreds of important calls in his life, but none of them had felt as heavy as this one. Finally, a click sounded, and a tired yet tense voice answered on the other end. Jasper. Dominic's voice was hoarse. Jasper closed his eyes for a second, then spoke slowly, clearly enunciating every word. I found Aiden. An absolute silence followed. There was no immediate response, no sound except for Dominic's labored breathing. Jasper could feel the man on the other end of the line trying to process what he had just heard. Maybe Dominic was holding his breath, trying to figure out if this was some cruel joke. Then suddenly, a small sob broke the silence, interrupted, like it came from the deepest well of pain. Are you sure, Jasper? Dominic's voice nearly whispered, but it was so broken that Jasper knew he was crying. When was the last time he heard Dominic cry? Maybe it was that night Aiden went missing, when Dominic had called him in the dead of night, his voice desperate and raspy, pleading for help. But at that time, Jasper hadn't known what to do. He didn't believe Aiden could be found, didn't think there could be any miracle. But now, after 3 long years, Jasper was holding the very thing Dominic had always hoped for. Yes, Dominic. Jasper's voice was certain, without a hint of hesitation. It's Aiden. It's your son. On the other end, Dominic choked. Jasper could hear him struggling to breathe, powerless against the overwhelming emotions. The two of them were silent for a few seconds, but that silence felt endless. Then Dominic whispered, his voice trembling more than ever. Where are you? I'll come right now. Jasper glanced over at Aiden, still sitting on the old steps, his eyes filled with doubt and weariness. Aiden had heard the conversation, but there was no clear reaction, only his small hands clutching the edge of the coat Jasper had draped over him earlier. Jasper turned back to the call, speaking in a deep voice. You don't need to come. I'll bring Aiden to you. Dominic let out a breath, but Jasper could hear the deep gratitude in his voice. Thank you, Jasper. Thank you for not abandoning him. Jasper tightened his grip on the phone, feeling a slight knot in his throat. He had abandoned the boy once. He hadn't recognized him, had shoved him aside without a second thought. But this time, he wouldn't do that again. He ended the call and took a deep breath before turning to Aiden. This would be the most important moment. Would the boy go with him? Was he ready to face the father who had been searching for him all these years? Jasper knew this journey was just beginning. Jasper stepped into the cafe, immediately feeling the warmth inside, a stark contrast to the cold air outside. Yet even that warmth couldn't ease the weight of the tension pressing heavily on his heart. Aiden walked beside him, slow and cautious, each step small and hesitant, as if any misstep might cause the ground to collapse beneath him. Jasper glanced at the boy. He hadn't said a word during the walk, hadn't questioned where they were going or who he was about to meet. But in his green eyes, Jasper could see it clearly, a storm of emotions swirling inside. In the corner of the cafe, Dominic was waiting. As soon as Jasper and Aiden entered, he jumped to his feet, as if he couldn't bear another second of waiting. His eyes scanned the room, and when he saw the boy standing beside Jasper, his entire body froze. It was as if time had stopped. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no sound came out. His face went pale, his hand gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Aiden stood still. He didn't move forward, nor did he step back, simply standing there, facing the man who had once been his whole world. Father and son looked at each other, but between them was an invisible gap created by 3 years of separation. Neither knew what to do, neither knew what to say. No one dared to break the silence. Dominic's breathing grew more rapid, as if even he couldn't believe what was unfolding before him. After 3 years of searching, of hope and despair, finally, Aiden was standing right there, just a few steps away. But the boy was no longer the child he once knew. Aiden was thinner, smaller. His eyes no longer filled with innocence. Instead, they held caution, confusion, and the most painful thing, something almost like unfamiliarity. Dominic took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears welling up in his eyes. He took a step forward, but immediately realized it was too fast. He stopped, his shoulders trembling slightly. Then, as if unable to bear it any longer, he knelt down. Without hesitation, without pride, Dominic knelt on the cold cafe floor, completely surrendering to the reality before him. He didn't care about the curious stares around them. He didn't care if anyone was watching. All that mattered to him was one thing: his son. Aiden. His voice trembled, cracking between sobs. Daddy's here. Aiden blinked, his eyelashes trembling, as though he had just heard something too unimaginable to comprehend. He didn't move, didn't react, but tears began to fill his green eyes. He had imagined this moment countless times over the past 3 years, hoped, then been disappointed, dreamed of this image, then woken up to the terrifying emptiness. But now, this wasn't a dream. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Aiden could no longer hold back. He threw himself into Dominic's arms. Dominic couldn't believe it. He almost stopped breathing when he felt the warmth of that small body, the child he had thought he would never find again. He hugged Aiden tightly, as if with just the slightest release, the boy would vanish again. His arms trembled, his hands gripping his son's back, feeling every fragile heartbeat. Tears streamed down his face, hot and fresh, landing on Aiden's messy brown hair. I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner. I've been searching for you for 3 years. Dominic's voice cracked, each word choked with emotion. Aiden didn't respond, only burying his face in his father's chest, the soft sobs vibrating through his body. For the first time in 3 years, he felt he was no longer alone. Jasper stood silently beside them, watching that moment unfold. A strange feeling washed over him. He had once thought this moment would never happen, had thought that Dominic would live forever in the pain of losing his son, that Aiden might forever remain a painful memory in Dominic's life. But now, they had found each other. Father and son had finally reunited. But Jasper also knew that this wasn't the end. A single hug couldn't erase 3 years of separation. The scars Aiden carried couldn't vanish in a few fleeting seconds. What had the boy been through in those 3 years? How had he survived? Who had taken him? And why couldn't he come home? How many questions still remained unanswered? How many wounds were still raw? Jasper clenched his fists, feeling an invisible weight settle on his shoulders. They had found each other, but the real journey was only just beginning. The reunion of Dominic and Aiden was still fresh when a new storm approached. Before Dominic could fully savor the moment of holding his son once more, the door to the cafe swung open, and a middle-aged woman stepped in, her strides deliberate and commanding. Jasper instantly recognized her the moment her cold gaze swept across the room. Margaret Hartley, Sarah's mother, Aiden's grandmother. Her presence didn't carry any warmth of family ties. Instead, it was filled with coldness and judgment. Dominic tightened his hold on Aiden when he saw Margaret walking toward them. She stopped at the table, her sharp eyes locking onto her former son-in-law with a disdain that was impossible to hide. A tense silence filled the air before she spoke, each word cutting through the room like a knife. You don't deserve to be the father of that boy. The words were a direct blow to Dominic, but he didn't react immediately. Aiden flinched, clinging tightly to his father, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Jasper could feel the tension in the air, but he also knew that this was just the beginning. Margaret didn't give Dominic a chance to respond. She pulled out a stack of papers, slamming them down on the table in front of them. I filed for custody of Aiden. You are not fit to raise him. Jasper glanced at the documents, recognizing them as an official lawsuit. In it, Margaret accused Dominic of being an irresponsible father who had abandoned his son, allowing the boy to wander the streets as a homeless child for 3 years. The lawsuit painted a picture that was entirely unfavorable for Dominic, a man who had allowed his son to go missing and failed to fulfill his duty as a father. Dominic felt blood rush to his head, his hands clenching in anger. What are you talking about? I've been searching for my son for 3 years. I never gave up. His voice cracked, not from fear, but from the deep frustration of facing this injustice. But Margaret merely smirked coldly. Yet the boy still had to live on the streets. Is that how you define responsibility as a father? Jasper stood silently to the side, observing the confrontation. He knew this was a battle Dominic couldn't fight alone. Margaret wasn't just any woman. She was wealthy, powerful, and well-connected. If she was determined to get custody of Aiden, she would stop at nothing to achieve it. And worse yet, Jasper knew that the courts might side with her. A man who had let his son go missing for 3 years would certainly not be an ideal candidate for custody in the eyes of the law. Aiden sat quietly, his green eyes full of confusion. The boy didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel the heavy atmosphere surrounding them. He had found his father, but now it seemed like he might be torn away again. He clutched Dominic's sleeve tightly, as if seeking reassurance amid the turmoil unfolding. But could he choose? Did he have the right to decide his own future, or would someone else make that decision for him once again? Jasper clenched his fist, knowing that things were becoming increasingly complicated. They had found each other, but the real battle had only just begun. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. The cold light from the tall windows reflected off the wooden floor, creating an eerie atmosphere that seemed to seep into every corner. Jasper sat beside Dominic, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. He knew this wasn't just any custody case. This was the most important battle of Dominic's life, and Aiden's too. On the opposite side, Margaret Hartley sat upright, her face an impassive mask. Beside her was a well-known lawyer, one who had represented countless custody disputes and almost never lost. Jasper wasn't surprised. Margaret was the type of person who would do anything to get what she wanted. She didn't just want custody of Aiden. She wanted to ruin Dominic's image in the eyes of the court. The judge lightly tapped the gavel, calling the court to order. Jasper stood, representing Dominic. He took a deep breath before speaking, choosing his words carefully. Your Honor, we are not here today because Dominic Reeves is an irresponsible father, but because he is a father who has never stopped searching for his son for the past 3 years. Jasper took a slow step forward, his gaze fixed on the judge. No one can imagine the pain a father feels when his child suddenly disappears. Dominic has done everything he could. He called the police, hired private detectives, searched everywhere. But he couldn't fight the bitter truth. Aiden was taken from his arms without any trace. Jasper turned to look at Aiden, sitting in the witness chair, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat. The boy didn't dare look at anyone, his eyes fixed on the floor, as though trying to shrink into his own world. Jasper knew this was the most important moment, the moment Aiden would have to make his own choice. On the other side, Margaret's lawyer stood, his tone cold and sharp. Your Honor, we cannot ignore an important fact. Dominic Reeves has allowed his son to go missing for 3 years. No matter how much he searched, the truth remains that Aiden had to survive on his own, had to live a life of wandering without a home, without protection. This is not how a responsible father behaves. The man turned, directing his gaze at Aiden. Aiden, do you remember what you had to endure over the past 3 years? Do you remember where you slept? How hungry you were? Do you think a real father would let you go through all of that? The room became tense. Every eye now fixed on the small boy sitting in the chair. Aiden bit his lip, his shoulders trembling slightly. Jasper could see the inner turmoil in him. A long silence stretched. The courtroom was so silent it felt suffocating. Every eye was fixed on the small boy standing at the witness stand. Aiden, missing for 3 years, now standing here, forced to make a decision for his own life. The boy clenched his hands, his bright green eyes locking with the judge's for a moment. He took a deep breath, as if gathering every ounce of courage he had left. His voice came out trembling at first, but the more he spoke, the stronger it became. I remember sleeping on the sidewalk. I remember the hunger, not being able to sleep because I was so hungry. I remember the fear every time night came, not knowing where I would be the next day. Aiden paused for a second, as though he himself was being pulled back into those memories. I remember thinking no one needed me anymore. Jasper glanced at Dominic. He was gripping the edge of the table, his eyes bloodshot, his body rigid, as if just hearing one more word would cause him to collapse right there. For the past 3 years, Dominic had lived in torment and despair, blaming himself for not being able to protect his son. But what Aiden was about to say next would change everything. The boy looked up, his eyes meeting his father's. But I was wrong. Margaret furrowed her brow. She sat up straighter, as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. But Aiden didn't stop. Dad never abandoned me. His voice was clear, more decisive. He's been searching for me nonstop. I can see that in his eyes. Aiden turned to face the judge, his voice no longer wavering. I don't want to be away from him. I want to stay with my dad. His words echoed powerfully, breaking the heavy silence in the courtroom. Jasper could feel a wave of shock ripple through the room. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for a response from Margaret, from the judge. But the only sound that broke the stillness was a choked sob from Dominic. He bowed his head, his hands trembling as he quickly wiped away the tears that ran down his cheeks. Margaret opened her mouth, perhaps to say something, but this time no one cared to listen to her anymore. Aiden had made his choice, and that choice was final. Jasper looked at Aiden, his heart swelling with an emotion too complex to describe. A child who had lost so much, but today he had regained the most important thing, his family. The courtroom was engulfed in a suffocating silence. Every eye was fixed on the judge as she held the gavel in her hand, her stern gaze sweeping across both sides. The most important moment of the trial had arrived. Jasper glanced at Dominic, noticing him holding his breath, his hands tightly clenched, his body rigid as though bracing for whatever might come, whether it was hope or despair. Beside him, Aiden sat still in the witness chair, his eyes full of anticipation. The judge took a deep breath and then spoke slowly. After thoroughly reviewing the evidence, the testimonies of all involved parties, and considering the best interests of the child, the court has decided. She paused for a second, but that moment stretched on endlessly for everyone in the room. Jasper could feel the tension filling the space. Finally, the judge slammed the gavel down. Custody is granted to Dominic Reeves. The atmosphere in the room exploded. A wave of emotion washed over Dominic, and Jasper could clearly see his shoulders shaking, his red eyes unable to hold back the burst of joy. He had won. After 3 years of despair, countless sleepless nights, and moments when he thought he would lose his son forever, today Dominic had regained Aiden. Aiden didn't wait another second. He jumped off his chair and ran straight toward his father. Dominic immediately knelt down, pulling his son into his arms, holding him tightly as if he never wanted to let go again. "I will never let you go again," Dominic whispered, tears streaming down his face. Aiden nodded, burying his face in his father's chest, his small body trembling with emotions that could no longer be contained. On the other side, Margaret Hartley sat motionless. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. The powerful woman had lost. After all her efforts to gain custody of her grandson, after all the sharp accusations against Dominic, she had failed. Jasper waited, watching her for any reaction, anger, defiance, or perhaps a final word. But there was nothing. Then, unexpectedly, Margaret began to cry. She said nothing, simply sitting there, her hands trembling as she held her face in them. Jasper had never seen a Margaret Hartley like this, a woman of power now reduced to a weakness she could no longer hide. Dominic glanced at her, his gaze softening for a moment. Even though she had done everything to separate father and son, the truth remained undeniable. She loved Aiden too. Margaret took a shaky breath and slowly stood up. She walked toward Dominic and Aiden, her gaze lingering on her small grandson. In the midst of bitterness, there remained a touch of tenderness. Finally, she bent down and placed a hand gently on Aiden's shoulder. "Live well, Aiden," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Wherever you are, I will always wish for your happiness." Aiden looked up, his eyes filled with a hint of confusion. He didn't know how to respond, but in the end, he gave a small nod. Amidst the old wounds, there was still a faint glimmer of hope that things could be healed. Margaret looked at Dominic one last time, then turned and walked out of the courtroom. She didn't say anything more, didn't resist, didn't fight anymore. She accepted the truth. Jasper let out a quiet sigh of relief. Finally, everything was over. Dominic had gotten his son back. Aiden finally had a home to return to. But more than just the victory in court, this was a victory of love, of reunion, and of the belief that no matter what happens, family is the most important thing. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun bathed the steps in golden light, casting a warm glow over the faces walking out of the grand doors. Dominic held Aiden's hand tightly, Jasper walking beside them, feeling the overwhelming sense of relief in the air. Things weren't over. Aiden would still need time to heal. Dominic would have to learn how to be a father after 3 years of separation. And Margaret may not have entirely let go. But today, they had each other, and that was what mattered most. 3 weeks after the trial, life for Dominic and Aiden was gradually returning to normal. Aiden still had many things to adapt to. A home that no longer felt like the cold streets. Meals that were no longer just scraps of bread given by strangers. The boy was beginning to believe that he truly had a family. But even though life had become more stable, there was still a shadow lurking in everyone's mind. Margaret Hartley. Since walking out of the courthouse, she had completely disappeared. No phone calls, no letters. Jasper had expected her to continue causing trouble with more legal actions, but that never came to pass. This left Dominic uneasy. Margaret was not the type of person to give up easily. Then one day, when Dominic was at home with Aiden, the doorbell rang. He didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. He took a deep breath before opening the door. Margaret stood there, still with her usual stern demeanor, but today there was something different. She no longer had the coldness, no longer the usual pride. They stood facing each other for a long moment without either of them speaking. Aiden silently observed from behind Dominic, his eyes betraying the tension he felt. Margaret noticed him, but instead of her usual pressure, this time her gaze softened in a way it never had before. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice lower than usual, without the sharpness of before. "I want to see Aiden." Dominic frowned, cautious. "You've lost custody of him." "I know," Margaret nodded, as if for the first time truly accepting that truth. "I'm not here to argue or take him away anymore." Her voice softened, her eyes distant. "Aiden is all that's left of my daughter. I just want to visit him, if you allow it." Neither of them had expected this. A request from Margaret Hartley instead of a declaration of war. Dominic was momentarily taken aback, but then he looked at the woman in front of him. She looked more tired, more vulnerable, no longer the powerful, ambitious woman, but simply a grandmother wanting to see her grandchild. Aiden remained silent, but Jasper could see the internal struggle within him. Despite Margaret's attempts to separate him from his father, the boy couldn't deny that she was still the only remaining family member besides Dominic. Finally, Aiden broke the silence. Can she come in?" That simple question made both Dominic and Jasper turn to look at the boy. Margaret was momentarily stunned, then her eyes softened. A faint smile appeared on the face that had always been so cold. She nodded. "Thank you, Aiden." And so, for the first time in many years, they sat together, no longer adversaries in a battle, but a family trying to heal old wounds. Jasper sat quietly in the corner of the living room, his eyes watching Dominic and Aiden seated on the sofa. They had truly become a family. He saw the loving gaze in Dominic's eyes as he listened to every word his son said, noticed how Aiden no longer held the caution or distance he once did. 3 years of separation had brought them pain, but now they had found each other. Margaret sat across from them, silently observing her grandson. There was a softness in her that Jasper had never seen before. No more accusations, no more judgment, just a grandmother trying to make amends for past mistakes. Occasionally, she smiled as she saw Aiden excitedly share something. The cracks between them couldn't disappear overnight, but Jasper knew this was a new beginning. He involuntarily took a deep breath, feeling a strange sensation rising in his chest, a sense of relief, but also a lingering emptiness. Jasper had always been a man of work. He never imagined he would have such an important role in anyone else's life. But now, as he looked at Dominic and Aiden, he realized something. He hadn't just helped them find each other. He had found himself. He had once believed that a person's success was measured by fame, money, and the victories in court. But everything he had witnessed over the past few months made him realize that the true meaning of life wasn't in those material things. It was in relationships, in the moments where people found connection with one another. Jasper had never considered being part of something larger than himself until Aiden came into his life. Watching the boy change day by day, from a lost child to one who now knew he had a place to belong, Jasper felt his own heart change. He was no longer just a man living for numbers, legal files, and dry negotiations. He had found something more meaningful, a reason to believe he could make a difference in someone else's life. Jasper smiled softly. Perhaps for the first time in years, he truly understood the value of family. And though he was not of the same blood as Aiden or Dominic, he knew that he would always be part of this story. The evening light streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. Jasper stood up, stepped onto the balcony, and felt the gentle breeze pass by. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, letting his emotions settle. This journey had changed Dominic and Aiden, but more importantly, it had changed him. The night sky stretched endlessly, glowing with thousands of sparkling stars. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the cool breath of a peaceful evening. On a wide field outside the city, three people sat quietly together: Aiden, Dominic, and Jasper. Gone were the tensions, the legal battles, the fear of being torn apart. Only peace remained. Aiden looked up, his green eyes sparkling under the starlight with excitement. He pointed to the sky. "Look, the Big Dipper." His voice was full of joy, as if he had just discovered a secret treasure that only he could see. Dominic smiled, pulling his son into his arms, his embrace warm and full of love. "So beautiful. It's like a bridge connecting the past and the future." Jasper sat beside them, watching the father and son with a sense of relief. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt alone. The feeling was unfamiliar, yet incredibly comforting. He had once thought his life revolved around the law, lawsuits, and cold negotiations. But now he was here, not as a lawyer, but as a friend, a witness to a family's reunion, someone who had found the true meaning of life. Dominic turned to Jasper, his gaze sincere. "Thank you, Jasper." No need for further explanation, no flowery words, just a simple sentence, but one that conveyed everything Dominic wanted to express. "Thank you for helping him find his son. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for becoming a part of this journey." Jasper took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. He nodded gently, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. For the first time, he wasn't a cold lawyer anymore. He was part of a family. Next to him, Aiden rested his head on his father's shoulder, his eyes slowly closing. The boy had been through so much over the years, but tonight, he was no longer alone. Under the vast night sky, he knew he had a place to belong. Jasper lay back on the grass, gazing up at the sky where the stars continued to shine brightly. This story began with an accidental shove and ended with a meaningful embrace. An imperfect ending, but a new beginning for all of them. A new family, a new life, and a hope that had never dimmed. As the stars shine above, marking the beginning of a new chapter for Aiden, Dominic, and Jasper, we are reminded that life is unpredictable. A single moment, a simple action, can change everything. From a cold push on the street to an embrace filled with love, this journey has been one of redemption, healing, and the power of family. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the importance of second chances and the bonds that hold us together, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. It inspires us to bring you more heartfelt and powerful stories. A new story is already on the horizon, one filled with emotions, twists, and lessons that will stay with you. So stay tuned, hit the notification bell, and be ready for the next unforgettable journey. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.